Hello and welcome everyone to episode 3, season 2 of DigiTales. My name is Faizan Syed, and today I have a guest who requires no introduction, Senator Sherry Rehman. But even though she requires no introduction, I'll just give you a quick background about her great achievements. She was the editor of the Herald magazine for over a decade. She then became a member of the National Assembly in 2002, re-elected in 2008. Minister of Information with additional portfolios of health and women's development. She then went on to found the Jinnah Institute right around those days, which is a think tank, nonprofit. Became the ambassador to the US in the PPP's government, and then went on to become a senator and is proactively working on some of the most important bills and some of the most important committees like FATF that we're seeing these days. Hello and welcome, Senator Sherry Rehman. How are you?
Thank you, Faizan. I just want to correct you. Clearly, you didn't get my, you didn't get the memo on my profile. I didn't go on to Jinnah Institute. I created Jinnah Institute.
I found it. Yes, sorry, I said I found it. You found
and
it.
It took a lot of doing, and it still takes a lot of doing to keep it going, because there's no funding for such things, and there is no room in Pakistan for independent think tanks that encourage critical reasoning. They're either supported by the state or, international donors. It's very difficult to maintain independence and be able to speak truth to power and encourage young people to find space to think about strategic issues as well as fundamental rights and entitlements in Pakistan.
And what drove you to found that Jinnah Institute? What was the mindset behind it?
Yeah, I was actually working. I've been on the think tank circuit for a long time. I'm fascinated by all of them, how they create knowledge. These are institutes that create knowledge for societies. They think independently. Even very often, the big institutes in America, respected ones, are aligned with political parties. They're aligned with a view of thinking. And whether they're aligned or not, they're great bodies of knowledge creation, which to me is all about the future. And even now, and there was a great deficit in Pakistan. And I remember being invited to several talks internationally, and one of them, they were all powered by think tanks. And Pakistan really didn't have an independent critical thinking area where young people were working, generating new ideas, having some independence to think out loud. And so I was invited to a track 2 dialogue with India and Pakistan, and I found that the whole thing was curated by the Indian side. And I said, but why is there no Pakistani principle? There was an Indian think tank, a big one. And I said, why is there no Pakistani? They said, well, we've been looking for non-state think tanks, and you people don't have any. There are just government ones, and they weren't a government outfit either. So I said, right. And I had actually set this up in the UK when I was living there for 2 years. There was the Nehru Center where everybody went to. And I just said, well, Pakistan needs to have something outside the embassy-sponsored events. And so I just set this up with my own resources, and we registered it in the UK. Then I registered in Pakistan. And then around 2009 or 10, when I had resigned from my ministries and I was on, traveling a bit more. And I said, well, I know I'll give you a think tank that will do this. I will not keep going to events that are curated by one side only. They set the agenda, so once you're setting the agenda, one side is setting the agenda, then I'm not just ready to go on junkets. So I said, no, I declined. And then I said, we'll call you when we have an institute to be able to speak to you as an equal and be able to set our own agenda. And so that's how it started. And it's been a struggle, but it's been extremely rewarding working with young people. I'm very proud of those that I have mentored and who've gone out to be, young resource professionals everywhere. And I hope that we can keep this going, but I don't know for how long.
How do you recruit young people, and what is their incentive in working for a think tank? I mean, what's the career path for them?
So we're very small, and but I'm personally, often have taught them how to write. I take time out. It's just something I've committed to. I don't draw any salary or anything, but everybody else gets to. And I take time out to curate and groom their skills everybody has different skill sets, but writing is a rare one, especially in English. And since I've been an editor, I'm obviously equipped to do that. And it's word of mouth. People apply, they see us on social media, they see our publications. Those who are reading internationally are obviously see our publications. So there's a whole long line of people always applying, and we have more applicants than we are able to accommodate. But I'm trying to start a mentorship program now. I'm hoping to start a Benazir Bhutto internship for women's studies, and another one on human rights named after Jahangir. Various internships. So we do try to not just keep people for a short time, but groom them through a professional life cycle. And so two of my senior most people are now are big officials in the national security and even the digital communications world.
Oh, wow. Impressive. And how do you raise fundraising?
Yeah.
Fundraising, though, must be difficult, right?
Corporate and of course, international funders are no longer really welcome here. So some of it is corporate, some of it is, I, for instance, have continued to fund a great deal of what I can. So we're never that big, but luckily I was able to get, instead of pouring my funds as an M&A into projects that were really not, I wasn't sure where they're going, I actually used my funds as an M&A to do this. I bought some land and I made a trust and I put it in that. So it's all transparent, and there's, at least we don't have to, keep paying the rent and all of that. But it's still a struggle because very often, you find that other expenses are not, and it's not just it's not really about expenses. It's
right.
about finding human resource. A lot of people apply, but you'd be amazed at what kind of skill training people are getting, and what basic fundamentals of critical thinking are being taught in our humanities and social sciences. So it's very hard. I get a lot of kids applying when they want to come back from international universities, and I groom them and I, do what I can. But the post-millennial experience isn't always fantastic. I have some wonderful, committed, loyal people who really are fantastic and who have been with me off and on through the years. But they're rare birds, really. But I'm lucky to find them, and we keep looking and we keep finding good people.
That's good. That's good. You mentioned your time as an M&A. You worked on some very controversial bills during that time. I believe there was a child marriage bill. You tried working on the blasphemy bill. Is it difficult in this country to bring about reform and change because there's so much opposition? And if so, how does one who's elected, or someone young who's looking to aspire into a career in politics, what's their motivation if they feel that it's very difficult to bring about change here?
It is, and it isn't. I think one has to look at the life cycle of, say, laws and even societies in moving, in creating momentum for change. And I think that the 2002 assemblies, the National Assembly that I came into, was pivotal in changing the course of Pakistani discourse. In that, there were many more women in that particular assembly. And I believe that there's documented evidence for that the women did so much more of rights legislation and did so much more of what is known as parliamentary business that we changed the discourse. As a new legislator, you are often at sea, but political parties provide, at least ours does, some venues and avenues for mentorship. If people are interested, then there's always people, senior people, to help you. Etazar's Ehsan, for instance, on ground, was even in the Senate later on. Bizarrely, we were both I was with him as an M&A and then later on as a senator. And when he left as leader of opposition, he made sure I was groomed for the post. And the People's Party was also very enabling as an environment for making women real leaders, not just token sort of figureheads on a table. So I think that's also very important. But my chief mentor in all of the times I have been in politics was Benazir Bhutto. I mean, until she passed away, until she was assassinated brutally and martyred, she was literally every day in touch with me on the email. And while I was powering through a lot of work, she was powering more and making sure that she looked into the minutiae of my life, the dual burden women face, the work-life balance, as we call it, all of that. She was even careful to guide me on that. I mustn't go. I must not neglect the family. Things like that, which are very important in an environment where women always have to reinvent their gravitas every day at the table, and this still happens to this day.
Interesting. So it requires a lot of mentorship, is what you're mentioning, and it seems as though as long as the parties have structure to be able to provide that mentorship, the young aspirants will have a path ahead of them.
Of course.
You also were the ambassador to the US. You've seen the relationship evolve. It's a very evolving, fluid relationship. How do you see the relations between us and the US change with the new administration coming in place?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been a very fraught relationship in terms of a cognitive disconnect between both sides in terms of what to expect and what to deliver. And there are different eras. If you look at the relationship, both have depended on each other to a great extent, but there's been a large pool of mistrust also, for which there are various reasons. I mean, for instance, if you just take the period I was there, I was sent there literally not happy to go, but as a crisis ambassador. And after we had a terrible crisis in Salala, where 26 of our soldiers were martyred in what is known as friendly fire. Friendly fire meant that, the Americans at the border patrols had done this, and so there was a great deal of outrage, at least on one side, because while all of this happens, we were expecting an apology at the very least from our non-NATO ally, and we were in a close alliance, which was also costing us politically on the ground in Pakistan, because America is looked at in very ambivalent ways by even the Pakistani public, while the people loved the idea of their universities and their soft power and what the culture that was being propagated, at least in the pre-Trump era, the ideas of freedom and the culture of individualism and free thinking that America stood for. That kind of ambivalence is when you put it create a paradox and juxtapose it with how politically Pakistanis feel about America is very different. While I know somebody making a speech against America, his children are studying there. He's making sure his children are studying there. So as a society, while Pakistan, I think, valued and still values the American relationship greatly, as governments we have, and as politicians we have been very ambivalent, as they have too. I mean, it's not been one-sided. There's been a lot of do more, at least the time I was there, and a lot of carrot and stick going on in the relationship, which is not always conducive to building trust. And I think that's still something that's out there for us to explore. But I think given the Biden administration and the journey America itself has been through in the last, you've seen in the last so many years, where much has changed and the great polarities have come out. A great deal of extremism has surfaced in a very different context, but in a very real manifestation of social divides and hatreds, including racism. So I think we have seen a great political, social, and cultural upheaval in America. And Joe Biden's first speech was very healing, I thought. He said that he used the word unity 11 times at least, and the need to unify. So I think all of that's important, but he will be spending more time in healing and rebuilding America So we should not be spending too much time expecting a great deal of empathy from a man who is extremely busy and a leader, but who also understands. The good news is that he understands the region. He's had enough exposure to Pakistan, India, South Asia. And the tough news is that they are, as institutionally, United States is, in foreign policy terms, institutionally allied right now with India in ways that we really can't change. And part of that has to do with our relationship with China, which they really can't change, nor can we, or nor should we, because we have in us, with us, an ally that is both reliable and predictable. So predictability is critical to building relationships in foreign affairs, and I think that's been an element that's been missing between Pakistan and the United States. Though there are still our largest trading partner, and I think we should explore markets more than just pure security relationships with the United States. I think they'll be happy to work that end also. So we do always have opportunities where we think doors are shutting. I think there are a huge amount of opportunities. We have an excellent ambassador there, and we can really explore new ways that are talked about. If we're really looking at geoeconomics as a way of moving forward, and the pivot, the core of our diplomatic impetus, then this is a huge opportunity. The United States won't shut its doors to market-based initiatives. So right now, we are grappling with the EU right now, which our government had opened up the GSP plus 2, which was a very important set of tariff-related incentives for Pakistan and developing countries. We need to explore those kind of relationships with the United States.
Do you think the United States would be hesitant if Pakistan sort of puts its eggs in the CPEC basket?
Well, that's already been, there's a fair amount of public and a huge amount of private strategic neuralgia in the United States about China, about its surge in growth over the last century.
Even though they're huge trading partners on their own.
Of course there are. That's how it works. I mean, this is not the Cold War 2.0 in my view. It's a very different animal, the way it's shaping up the relationship, because they are continuing to trade and they're continuing to look at options to maximize their own national and economic security potential. And I think that's how states should operate. You really need to think about how you are maximizing your own internal to benefits to your country. Really, that's what foreign policy is about in a total nutshell, and a very crude kind of thumbnail sketch.
So as long as it benefits your economy, you're fine.
Well, I mean, obviously there are security concerns. You can't suddenly be asked to give up traditional or your alignments, or even your, for instance, strategic anxieties need to be addressed. They may be treated as illusions that you have conjured, but they may also be based on very clear ground realities, which very often the West has chosen to ignore. And I think we need not to be apologetic about our own anxieties and what strategic anxieties and what we face in a very, very tough regional neighborhood. One side you have literally a great game playing in and out again. That's Afghanistan, which is really going through a particularly and spectacularly unstable time of what I call the fog of peace now. While America is pulling out of Afghanistan, some say expeditiously, some say irresponsibly, but I don't think there's any other way of pulling out for them at this point. But what they did craft was they tried to attempt a peace deal. However, that was not a peace deal that involved all Afghans, which is why it looks like it's falling apart, and nobody's quite sure who will be running Afghanistan or who will be funding Afghanistan's security structures and apparatus. Its core functions, the core state functions of Afghanistan, still need funding from abroad, and as do many states, but they are not infrastructurally still able to defend themselves against a very divided civil experience. And I think that's one of the things we have to worry about. Pakistan is caught in what I call a real bind, in the sense that a great deal of peacemaking is expected from Pakistan in a situation where it's virtually impossible until Afghans decide themselves how and when to do it. And there's a piece just by President Ashraf Ghani in Foreign Affairs today or yesterday, which is addressing the future of Afghanistan, and you see a lot of talk about it. Yet under all of that is a great deal of Afghan anxiety from all sides, from women, from society actors, even from the Taliban. And then, of course, there are elements of ISIS and Daesh growing in that area, which no longer get talked about. But that's been something that Pakistan and think tanks like us are watching, and we're seeing that we need to contain the possible fallout of escalated violence in Afghanistan when America pulls out without any kind of architecture for a secure peace deal. I mean, who will guarantee that security and
Right.
that and all of that? So there are too many questions about that. And then, of course, there's India. There's Modi's India, which has played havoc with both the Indian identity and how religious minorities, particularly Muslims, are treated in what used to be at least a definitionally secular country, which clearly it is not right now. That has ramifications for Kashmir, as you saw in how they revoked Article 370 one fine day. And so Pakistan is in a very difficult situation, but I don't think anything's impossible. The first path forward would be to use parliaments to advantage and build equities for change and seek a clear path forward. Right now, that's not happening.
If you touched on, you brought it to Kashmir, I was going to go there, and you touched on the fact that Parliament needs to play a bigger role. If there was a supporting actor that could help resolve the Kashmir issue, do you think the key role of supporting actor would be played by the US or would it be played by China?
Look, supporting actors are always needed in multilateral disputes, and whether India likes to hear this or not, this is a UN territory under UN dispute. It's officially defined as UN disputed territory. Now you can roll tanks into there and declare unilateral victories, but those don't hold until people of that ground have accepted them. There is a political divide now, even in illegally held Indian Kashmir, because what's happening there is that pro-Indian, pro-Federation Kashmiris have thrown up their hands in despair and actually rebelled against the Modi Sarkar and the center, if you like. So while all of that is happening, egregious human rights abuses are also scalding the earth of Kashmir. And it's painful to see that while some international actors want to talk about it, most have so much on their own plate right now, given the kind of, well, there's a pandemic, which is obviously hurting and dividing the entire world as we speak, but also a crisis of capitalism that we see in front of us. So there's a lot of angst and change going on in the world that we are not even able to map credibly, I think. And I don't mean we as a country. I think all of us, the intellectual, global, public intellectual of the world, really in the international community, are grappling with what is happening to the world, and how power has responded to it. And one of the issues is vaccine nationalisms, which you would have thought would not be the case given the kind of post-worldwide, World War II multilateral order was rights-based, and it's an illustration of how rights don't anyway matter, which links you back to Kashmir. Facts and rights very often don't matter in this very nasty, brutish world. To quote Hobbes, and I did study political philosophy at Smith, so that's why Hobbes comes up, but so does Rousseau, so does Descartes, and so do so many political philosophies of change and reform that undergird, of humanity that undergird what used to be a multilateral rules-based order. I feel that's fallen apart. The UN is still making noises. The WHO is still saying there shouldn't be vaccine apartheids. For instance, patents by Big Pharma shouldn't be allowed. And if Big Pharma was not allowed to sit and hold on to patents and make a huge amount of money, you and I
was their incentive.
Very different conversation. At least many of our own conversations in the International Parliamentary Union, which I'm a member of, are mostly about this, in how to equitably spread the benefits of saving lives, which is vaccination right now. It may still not be right, but that's the first line of defense that any country or humanity or this planet has. So I think these are important conversations, and to expect a great deal from the multilateral order at this point in terms of conventional geostrategic binds that we've all been in is difficult. So we have to really strengthen ourselves more than anything else, and then be able to first literally feed our own people. You feed your own people, and I'm distressed to say that we're no longer doing that. We used to be at least agriculturally self-sufficient. That's the first thing you have to be when all these nationalisms are rising to the surface. And economic nationalism is certainly very much a force out there. You have to see it, to believe it. Countries are placing, there are tariff wars now. This is the whole era of globalization worked when it worked, and it worked for the international community and those that were most powerful. Today it's falling apart when you need it the most, right? It's falling apart. Where is vaccination as part of the globalization spreading of equity, for instance? It's not. It's a failure of capitalism, and it's a failure of the world order as we see it.
So it's a function of focusing on your own house, getting your own house in order is what it seems to be the need of the hour. One of the challenges that we have in that area is the narrative that needs to be built around that. Pakistan for decades has suffered around building a cohesive narrative between all of its powers that lead the country. You know, let's say it's the establishment, judiciary, political parties, big business, and so on, bureaucracy, etc. Why does Pakistan, or why do these big sort of groups within the country that run the country, why are they unable to come and align on one narrative that they can work on with the people of Pakistan, for the people of Pakistan, and then sell the same narrative globally to create some level of alignment? Why is it such a challenge?
Because, first of all, you're addressing a load of current, shall we say, existential questions that are linked to Pakistan's well-being, if you like. And here we have a crisis of confidence in government, and that's not rare. That's always the case in the developing world and the developed world. There is often a crisis of confidence in government. But the point right now is, I think, there has been an unfortunate and artificial crisis created in distrusting political elites and the democratic system. So while it is the job of governments to mobilize and mobilize political elites around a core agenda, which I can clearly show you how Pakistan People's Party did in its government. I mean, we were known as the consensus-creating government to a point where it reached to a fault, and like everything was done by consensus. But I think that's very critical in societies such as ours, which need a great deal of healing. and which need core agendas addressed, and also around unity. We are a very heterogeneous country. I mean, our 4 provinces are very different ethnically, culturally, even in terms of language. We've lost East Pakistan to Bangladesh. Surely lessons need to have been learned, that this federation cannot be run with one central narrative. It needs pluralism. It needs inclusion as a driving political philosophy to run it. And that's always the task, that's the only and first task of the government, which currently I'm afraid governments don't understand. I'm not saying this because even if I would say this even if I was a journalist, and because I've seen mistakes are, of course, the norm all over the world, in government and in politics. I'm not talking about normative mistakes. I'm talking about a very existential fault line developing in the political arena these days, which is dangerous to our system, to the survival and ability of the parliamentary system to deliver. When the parliamentary system starts cracking and polarized around personalized and political fault lines, partisan fault lines, and the ability of the government to unify and hold the center starts dissipating, then you have a government which is no longer really able to build a consensus around anything. If you can't unify your country, no amount of speeches you make abroad and no amount of soft power that you employ will do the trick, because the fault lines will magnify at home, and that's very dangerous, especially at a time of economic and I would say existential health crisis.
So you're saying that narrative building begins with consensus building primarily. Once you have consensus, only then can you proceed forward.
I'm not talking about narrative building. This obsession with narrative building also has to, it diverts attention from what's actually on the ground. You can't create a message that is so divorced from reality that you just obsess about the message. And that's the problem with only narrative building. The narrative is really a function of what and who you are. It cannot be a bubble or a cloud in the digital commons, if you like, floating about as an alternate reality. And that's what sometimes I think those that peddle disunity and hate as part of the of their own creative impetus or their ability to get attention, because obviously hate brings more attention than an appeal to unity or even kindness. Okay, hate, you can, as a digital practitioner, you'll know that in all social media trends go towards the right. If they are based on hate, then they go towards the right, and they trend far more than a pacifist agenda or those that seek to unify. No, moderation, pacifism, consensus building don't trend. They don't create a spectacular new persona or image of you. But what it does do is that it destroys that image, and it creates no space. It starts to limit the space you actually have as an actor on the political or social stage to build any kind of culture of speaking for all. And you can't, so you can't liberate yourself from that tyranny of the nasty majority kind of cult, which you've seen, say, for instance, you see that in fascism, you see it in Modi's, you see it in a lot of places, and political parties as well, which have a tendency towards the right. They use that kind of, rah-rah right-wingism that is taken to extremes. And then they are unable to actually create, if you're not part of their culture of yes saying to whatever, to that echo chamber, then you're out. And if you're out, but right now, for instance, just addressing Pakistan's problem, it's not about narrative building. That's a separate question. Right now, the current and urgent crisis is about unity building. Until you have that, you will not have a center that can hold, and a center must hold in a federation or any country before it builds a narrative, before it seeks to speak credibly for the whole of the country. Right?
How can the present leadership build unity in the remaining term it has, let's say 2.5 years? How can it focus on that?
Short of having a lobotomy, sorry.
Yes, other than that.
Sorry. I think short of a complete 360-degree mindset, well, I mean, very simple. Political humility is what is missing, and it goes a long way in just opening doors. It goes a long way in building bridges. And I'm not talking internationally, I'm talking within the country. And especially when you're in power. I mean, my experience of power is that the minute you're even holding an office, you kind of lower your tone in terms of you can't afford to be shrill, you can't afford to build on the extreme, and you've got to be seen as someone who is operating as a public servant. The word
that means none of the politicians on the opposition at this point.
No, that's not true. Opposition has a lot of people who are humble and will be humble if they're in office. The same People's Party that is angry right now was actually, if you run a few tapes of the Prime Minister speaking or the President speaking, or even me as Information Minister, it's always like this. It's like, well, no, we need to take you on board. We need to fix what we can. It's all of that. Our finance ministers, our foreign ministers, our everybody. Key strategic ministries, which are only 4 or 5, were all serially embedded in. We weren't even allowed to wear fancy watches, you know. We were told you have to. Yeah, Mr. Zadai said you all better wear swatches now. Something that common people can identify with. Yes, I'm absolutely correct.
That's good practice. We noticed Obama wearing Timex back in some of his speeches. And, obviously it was very different from seeing, let's say, certain other governments in Pakistan wearing very different, ornaments on their wrists.
You know, when women, certain women or people wore fancy ties or something, President Zadai would say, I don't appreciate that. So you could, you were ticked off at everything.
Yeah.
That kind of culture, but that's just one thing. That's just, one thing. I'm saying then there would be the Prime Minister who would always be soft-spoken. And as his Information Minister, as the government spokesman, I was not, my goal was I must never even frown. I have to appear at all times the person who is in charge of her emotions and therefore the government's public image, which is of a public servant. We are public servants. We serve you. And if we are in any position to rectify 1,000,000 wrongs that we may even have been part of, then we need to certainly start trying. So everything was about building consensus and appealing to bipartisan, closing bipartisan, multi-partisan divides, both inside Parliament and outside Parliament.
That's interesting. So this sounds like the advice you would give aspiring young entrants into politics is sort of understanding the role of a public servant. It's almost as if people forget what the role of a public servant is and how a public servant should behave. Where would they go to get that training?
Well, I think first of all, society is now, the good news is society judges very fast. Sometimes that's not, the hair trigger is not either good in nuclear policy or in making judgments on people or even respond.
You've got Twitter for that. You've got Twitter that gives you all the answers.
Creating horrors like that, right? Armageddon when there's nothing.
Yeah.
When there's a little bushfire. So I think that if we remind ourselves that we are public servants, and not look at government or power as a way of maximizing our own gains, then we're there. In fact, I used to hate being minister because I was always, in my mind, I was always under stress that, there's a list of accomplishments, excuse me, that my government has promised. At least I have to fulfill my particular ministries. To that end, we had this 100 days document which used to float around in cabinet, and sabki haazri lagti thi, who's done what. And I was like, under pressure by my own anxieties that I've got to deliver, got to deliver. And therefore, always in consultation with civil society, always in consultation with the stakeholder. There were task forces in every ministry, which meant civil society was there the whole time. And that meant you can't really do wrong. You've got people telling you all the time, naysayers inside. You always have to have people criticizing you on the inside. And if you're insecure about that, you won't get anywhere. And sometimes it's irritating. It would, I would want to sort of throw my hands up and say, well, how do you even finish the day?
Right.
Well, you just don't. I mean, you just sleep a lot less because you're a public servant and you've got to serve with instruments that don't allow you to serve, because the bureaucracy is in Pakistan actually runs government, and their incentive is not to get into trouble or not to get the minister into trouble, which means you don't take risks. Which means now, though, it's very difficult because of after NAB, nobody wants to work.
There's zero risk taking.
File moves. I mean, I used to have to go back to work in the night. I had 4 ministries. I used to go back to my core ministry to see if the file has moved, because they were like, oh, she's back at after 9 to see. I said, because we don't have enough hours in the day. We're running around giving face so many places that you need to tell me what's actually been done. So, and no minister should have to, no public servant should have to do that, because the civil service is deeply insecure now in what it can actually deliver, what is right, what is not. The courts might call them in and humiliate them, or then they'll be asked by NAB, and 2 years later you're out, but your life's been destroyed. You were acquitted. Your life is over. Your experience inside shapes who you are and what public respect you thought you had, and a host of things, and how your family feels about you being in public service. All of that, even if you're burning with zeal to change things. So I think the environment is not at all optimal for creating momentum for reform. And without reform, we're not going anywhere.
Makes sense. I have one last question for you as we wrap up. Would you ever want to run for the office of Prime Minister?
Why would I want to wear that crown of thorns? But every politician has that ambition and feels that they can actually do things better. I think that's where we're all wrong. I think, yes, while the person matters, it matters a great deal. And you have history to tell you that. I don't need to go into a history lesson. But I think while the person matters, their relationship with ethics and morality and integrity matter, there has to be a lot more than that. Without a system, you're just a bunch of do-gooders wanting to fix things. And government is no NGO. It doesn't have the freedom or the liberty to be accountable to only its board and to just the people. We are accountable to the media. You're accountable to the whole world. And one little mistake now, I mean, even if you are caught eating more than 2 dishes at a meeting, for instance, you'll be considered, excessive, part of the inflationary spiral. Anything. You know how discourses and narratives are spun these days. So it would be a horrific crown of thorns without a systemic commitment to reform. And for that, a great deal of people would need to be on board. I mean, the first thing People's Party does, rightly so, is bring its own manifesto, create a minimum time frame for that ambition to be realized, and start saying, all right, you've got to do this, you've got to do this, but continue to unify. That's what we do. Look at what the time of the need of the time is, need of the hour is, and work with that, not with your personal identified needs. Look around, listen to other people, and then go forward. And at least then you have a chance, because people will respect you. People have to respect you. That whole business of being respected is crucial to being able to deliver on even 1/3 of your promises. And I think that's where you begin.
So if the system improves, yes, you would, is the answer I seem to have picked up upon.
No way. We already have a new generation. Let them carry that cross.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you so much. You've given a lot of time. You've answered some really nice questions around narrative building, about the importance of think tanks, and obviously public service, and the importance of how you conduct yourself in public service, which is often forgotten. Hopefully we can have you back here again. And thank you, and best of luck with the rest of your term as Senator.
Thank you, Faizan. Lovely speaking to you.
Good to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.